Welcome to the Australian Art Orchestra Pathfinder Music Leadership Program panel. And what we're going to be doing this evening is I'll be chairing a conversation on leadership and professional pathways in improvised music with these participants of the AAO Pathfinder Music Leadership Program. And they'll have an opportunity to discuss their experience of leadership and their take on the range of professional pathways in improvised music. Now, because there's other people listening in that might not know as much as this group in front of me here, the Australian Art Orchestra was formed by Paul Gabrowski in 1994, and it explores the meeting points between disciplines and cultures and imagines new musical forms to reflect the energy and diversity of the 21st century Australia. As the leading and longest-standing improvised music ensemble in Australia, the Australian Art Orchestra and its current artistic director, Peter Knight, are strongly committed to nurturing and developing leaders of the future. The Pathfinder Leadership Music Program is a one-year part-time associate artist role within the Australian Art Orchestra for an exceptionally talented emerging musician and a future leader with a practice in contemporary art music and improvisation. The program is designed to provide an opportunity to gain an insight into what is required to run a successful music ensemble and to gain experience and skills to prepare the associate artist for future artistic leadership roles. They might include as a performer, ensemble director, composer and curator, and they also gain experience as a producer and arts administrator. It's important to note that the Pathfinders program is very generously supported by the Ian Potter Foundation, who've had the vision to seed fund the first 5 years of this program. So what I'm going to do is we're all going to introduce ourselves, even though I did ask you each how you'd like to be referred to. I then thought perhaps it'd be better for you to say that yourself. But I'll start with myself. I'm a professor of music at Monash University. I'm also a composer, performer and artistic director of Decibel New Music Ensemble. And I've had a varied music practiced career for about 35 years. So over to you now. I might start at the other end with Aviva, because Aviva was the inaugural Pathfinder in 2018. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your practice?
Yeah, so I'm Aviva, as many of you know. I am a clarinetist, composer, improviser, curator, performance maker, I sometimes say. Yeah. Perfect.
And next, in 2019, the Pathfinder was Reuben Lewis. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm Reuben. I'm a trumpet player, electronic artist, composer, improviser, producer. I do a range of different creative practices, sort of spanning jazz and improvised music and electronic stuff. I also work a lot in dance and, I guess, cross-genre, cross-medium type work, and my main focus is a group called I Hold the Lion's Paw.
Right. And Helen, 2020 was your Pathfinder. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm Helen. I'm a double bassist, a vocalist, an improviser and a composer. And yeah, I've got a pretty varied practice myself that's developed over the years across many different influences. I started in classical music, went into jazz. Now I'm very much into contemporary classical techniques, extended techniques, and melding that and normalising that within an experimental folk kind of approach. And I love, exploring the potential of the double bass as a melodic vessel, not just in its traditional bass role, which I also love doing, but yeah.
Right. And I just acknowledge that the new 2021 Pathfinder, Jaithmathang, that you met earlier, introduced the panel. So it's great that we could all be here together actually in person. And as I mentioned, we're going to be looking at professional development in the Australian context tonight. So I think it's probably worth mentioning that we'll consider the impacts of COVID-19, so I might ask a few questions about that, but how the Pathfinder program has evolved as a result of the events of the last 2 years and how this shaped the experience for each of you as past and current Pathfinder associate artists during and beyond that. And, there's a focus on improvisation in the AAO, and I think it's a nice way to tie all your experiences together, I think. So what I'm going to do, I might ask some questions directly to one of you, but please feel free anytime to jump in if you've got something to add, and we'll have a Q&A for you all at the end. So if you have a question, keep it tucked away, and we'll have an opportunity afterwards for you to ask questions. But I'm going to start with you, Helen, because you're currently living the Pathfinder life. And I was wondering if you could tell us something about being part of the AAO community and the network around that as a result of being part of the Pathfinder program.
Yeah. I was really lucky that, I moved to Melbourne for this program. So I returned from Europe. I was over there for 2 years and was fortunate enough to land this role and immediately be just fostered in this incredible community of artists that surrounds the art orchestra. And I think for me it's been, even with COVID, which we'll talk about later, like you said, but I've just, managed to make so many connections in just the space of 12 months of just such varied practices across incredible artists residing in Australia and, internationally, lesser so, but to just become familiar with artists' work who reside overseas and who I hope to collaborate with at another point in the future. Being part of the community has really, beyond the 1 year role, which is now, I think it technically finishes now, right? I think it finished this week for me, but I feel really, like I said, fostered within this, art, music world with this ensemble, just to be able to continue collaborating and being a part of the team and to, be, just form part of the community, I guess, which, I didn't always think that it would be such a continued thing. It was, advertised as a 1 year role, but as soon as I started it, I realised there is a follow through. And
and let's take that to the ones who are, we're obviously all here at CMI, so you're still involved.
Mm-hmm.
Reuben, do you want to tell me a bit about that? Because you've had a year out, right, of your Pathfinder role. So how you're obviously still connected to that network. How's that turned out for you, that side of it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess for some context, I started the role about 6 months before COVID-19 hit, so I guess there was quite a disruption in everyone's lives, both in organisational perspectives as well as personal. But I found that being part of an organisation that is working in that realm in a space outside of my own individual practice was really nourishing, and to be able to sort of tackle these bigger issues moving through this space during this time has been really important to have other perspectives and also be part of a larger element than myself. And I think the 1 year on from my time as the Pathfinder, one thing that's been really clear is that it's opened up a lot of new perspectives on how the ecosystem of the Australian art world runs and functions and dysfunctions, and I guess also being involved with a community of people who are actively engaging with that and trying to produce work, make opportunities, and also make change in that space, and being able to be part of that over that course of time has been very important for me.
Great. And just building off that, Aviva, I wanted to ask you how the program has, if it indeed has at all, helped you advocate for yourself within this community of art practice that Reuben was referring to. Do you think it has offered you skills or a springboard or tools for ways to advocate your practice?
That's an interesting question. I feel like the opportunity gave me a lot of experience and kind of, I guess, connections, like kind of similar to the community element that we were talking about, like being part of this world and understanding it a bit better.
Mm-hmm.
Has perhaps opened up for me the idea that, maybe understanding that more different kinds of people or organisations and collaborators would be potentially interested in my work, sort of given me a bit of confidence in that respect. I suppose applying for things like this year I'm the resident at Peggy Glanville Hicks House, and I'm not sure if I would have applied for that before doing this opportunity. It sort of did feel like a stepping stone that meant that I felt like that was something that was, potentially on the horizon, and then was really fortunate to get that. But also advocating for others, I think. sort of understanding a little bit better the internal workings of an organisation and the kinds of things that producers and artistic directors are having to consider, to sort of understand it from both sides, I suppose. So to sort of try and be able to advocate for friends who are working as freelancers, new collaborators, to sort of be able to think about what they might be needing, but then maybe also what the organisation needs and all the considerations that come into play. Yeah.
It's interesting to hear you talk about advocating for others, because that, I guess, you could be considered a really key or core element of leadership, is being able to make that transition beyond yourself. And Reuben, we were talking earlier about moving from your own practice where everything you did was for yourself and your own practice and your collaborations, but actually moving out of that space and doing it for others was kind of freeing for you in some way. Yeah, can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, I guess it's it's very hard to see outside of your own universe sometimes, especially making art in any space is a tough job, and sometimes to be able to step away from that and to tackle a similar conundrum, or trying to find spaces for things that are bigger than yourself, really gives you that opportunity to be able to, as Aviva said, see things from every angle and find the best way to articulate your thoughts and create supportive networks for people in a way that is constructive or doesn't close doors, so to speak. Because it can be a very before this role, I think my perspective on a lot of what I was doing and a lot of what my fellow artists were doing, I felt like there was only one way to see it or to understand what was going on. And I think just the sheer sort of amount of stuff that happens in an office space when you're making this sort of work and realising what kind of interactions and negotiations need to happen to make anything work. When you see that, then you can't help but bring it into how you communicate beyond that point.
Yeah. And Helen, just can you talk a little bit about kind of juggling, being in the Pathfinder, and actually this is a question for all of you really. How do you manage, it's a 0.6 position, right? So you're also still playing as a musician, but you've also got other administration, you're probably doing teaching as well. How do you find juggling that? Because that seems to be an ongoing issue in Australia for artists, pulling together lots of different strands. Some people call it a portfolio career. That's other ways of talking about it. Yeah, how do you find that? How do you manage that?
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to Reuben just today about how, I don't know how sustainable all of those different types of jobs are at the same time, like with the teaching and being an active performing musician. It's tricky sometimes, and I think for me it's come down to, I was very fortunate this year to have, I was working full time across 4 different workplaces this year, and it was a lot, but luckily 3 out of 4 were very flexible. The school teaching was not, so I had to really kind of think ahead and also just assert my boundaries with that, just really communicating to them very early on that the Pathfinders position is the priority for me this year. And it's funny, with this year long term, I was thinking, after this year, I'll have more time and I'll be able to give a bit more to those other jobs, and nothing's changing. I found it's if anything, next year feels busier, and it's kind of exciting. I think with I'm staying on for still 1 day a week with the team, which is really nice, and I think that portfolio career feels real, because I feel very transient at the moment in just terms of being open to different opportunities that pop up, and especially as hopefully things get better soon, and the performances are coming back, and but I think that flexibility within the Pathfinder's position is very they're very understanding of if you, as long as you get the work done a lot of the time, but it's also you're there to have that as your priority, and there was no question that was my priority, so everything else was kind of had to slot in around that. But it's been a juggling act, but a good one, I think.
And what about, go back to you again, Aviva, Has it changed an experience like this? So you think most people, they kind of fumble their way into leadership roles, right? Well, that's definitely happened to me. You kind of learn when you arrive in these things. So I think it's a really special opportunity to be mentored through them or watch others do them and work alongside them. But I wondered actually if it's changed your own perspective of your career. Like, do you look at what you do in a different way after a project like Pathfinders? Has it impacted you in that way?
I'm not sure I totally understand the question, but I guess I feel like I had some leadership opportunities beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
I was probably quite lucky in that way. I'd had a similar role with Chambermaid quite a few years earlier, and I'd also worked within Astra, Chamber Music Organisation, kind of in quite a similar sort of position. Mm-hmm. And, you know, there's still a lot to learn, and I feel like it was a really great opportunity for me to, I guess, take my improvising work more seriously, because I'd also come from a classical music background, and those roles, I don't know if I really felt like I don't know if I would have identified in the same way as like a improvising musician. Certainly never felt associated with like it being a jazz musician. So it kind of gave me a new level of confidence in that respect, I guess. And some of the situations that Art Orchestra opened up for me, like playing a lot of jazz festivals and engaging in the kind of jams that happen after them, and sort of just like pushing myself in that direction and kind of realizing that a lot of the leadership skills I already had were sort of transferable. But then also to notice how different organisations like operate, and to sort of see the different ways that you can be a leader. Actually, like I think Peter Knight, who, you know, so it's so sad that he can't be here, but he's got a really particular approach to his leadership. Like he's extremely kind of casual actually, and he leaves a lot of space for other people, but in that openness that he brings, I guess that is the leadership. And actually that was one of the biggest things I think I learned out of my time there. I think before I probably felt like to be a leader was to be really organised and to know exactly what you want, and then realising that actually there's this other approach to leadership, which is to just hold space, and that just curating, like I think part of what's so great about how Pete directs Art Orchestra is that he kind of just curates people, really great people, and he like curates things through personal relationships and friendships, and from that space really interesting music happens. And there's that kind of approach to leadership too, which is a bit more hands off sometimes, and like trusting in that. I think I've definitely learnt to trust in that a lot more. Kind of, it's like an improvising leadership.
Yeah, I think that's what I was trying to say at the start, is that, you know, the actual nature of the music surely influences the nature of its administration to some degree, which might explain some of the things you're saying about the difference between classical organisations and this one. And what about, Reuben, you and Helen, you got any takeaways about leadership that you've picked up in your time with the Pathfinders program?
I mean, I guess one observation that I wanted to make is that the AAO trusts in us to deliver in our way, to find ourselves in this role and to sort of find our strength in that space. And I think there's a lot of, I think it's a rare thing to be able to be given a responsibility, that we have in these roles, and sort of be trusted to find our path through that space and lead the way that we are suited to do so. And also I think the change in perspective in that space, like going back to the career point you were talking about before, I'd never worked in a job that wasn't an hourly casual rate before, and so to understand that you can work differently and organise your time differently was incredibly powerful. So I've gone on a tangent. I've missed the point of the question.
No, you're right on track there.
But I think just to echo Aviva's point, there's many ways to lead, and what's important is that they let us find that for ourselves in that time.
I think also that for me, I think leadership is also about sharing generously. So like, you know, it's interesting you said before you started it, you found it harder to see outside of your practice. Did you say that?
Yeah, pretty much.
But yeah, I think I was the same. And then, yeah, just the different programs. They're like CMI is a good example. It's all about being together and yeah, not holding things just to yourself. It's like an openness to, you know, like Peter's approach and how I think that's really important, because if you're in a leadership role, you should be generous and you know, willing to, yeah, again, hold that space, but also be a mentor or to just, yeah, share what you do and also hear from others about what they do. And I think it's also that community that's really important in leadership, because, you know, you've got to reach out to people and you've got to connect with people constantly. I think that's been a really nice thing for me to notice. It's just that growing community that I'm in touch with, and I think it'll continue to grow.
And just something a bit more practical, I wondered if, you know, you could share with everyone that's listening, what did you learn about funding opportunities for improvising musicians? Have you found any things that you didn't know about before, or can you share with us, maybe you had to do, as part of this role, write some grant applications? You talk a bit about that, you know, specific to improvisation in Australia. Anyone got anything they want to share?
I mean, I guess I will offer that once again the perspective reaches into that space as well, understanding that that whole world is a very complex, sometimes counterintuitive space that you have to navigate and advocate for in your own way, and the it's a very tough world to be in, and it seems like the opportunities in one sense can shrink and become ever sort of unavailable, but I think what it's taught me is that there is a resilience and a ruthlessness that you need to have, not just in applying, but also just in having strength in your own vision and your own voice, and understanding how to articulate who you are and what you want to do, and know that there's always multiple ways to succeed.
Yeah.
That way, you know, that's a very positive spin on it, I would say.
I would say I've just learned how to use less words.
Yeah.
Just use way too many adjectives all the time, and I was like, oh, word counts just don't know, they don't work anymore.
Did you find any new opportunities through being associated with an association, right? Because they have different funding structures than individual artists, I guess. And I guess it's an opportunity also to see how individuals fit within an organisation, even when they're not in it, as such. What did you learn from being within an organisation about that?
Yeah, well, I guess in answer to your initial question, I don't know that there are so many funding opportunities that are specific to an improvising music opportunity. The only thing that sprung to mind is the Australian Music Centre sends each year two Australian musicians to Jazz Ahead conference, which is a funded opportunity. So that's one to look out for. But yeah, it probably isn't specific to improvised music, and I don't know that that's necessarily a problem, because I think you know, a lot of the funding opportunities that are available to everybody are cross up, not just cross-disciplinary music-wise, but cross-disciplinary across all art forms. And I don't think that's necessarily a problem, but it is good to sort of understand how you might want to talk about your work when you're also kind of maybe being assessed by people who might be applying for the same opportunity as a dancer or a visual artist. And maybe just, I think it can be quite useful to think about how other kinds of artists speak about their work, because I think in general musicians are sometimes not really that great at framing like what the importance of what they're doing is, particularly in improvised music, because I guess it is inherently generally a fairly abstract form, and sometimes it can be hard to argue for why that is important. So maybe trying to take some time in your own work to sort of try and understand like what is core to why you do what you do, and what the power of it is beyond the style or the method for generating the music, like whether it's composed or improvised. I don't think many people care, actually. It's like, what are you doing with it, and what is it? How does it function in society? How does it function within the arts? What does it mean? You know, I think if you can answer those questions, then your grant applications are going to be a lot more compelling, and also much more competitive against other art forms. Yeah, where people generally learn to speak about that a bit more.
And have any of you had the opportunity to be on a peer on a panel as part of your experience, so that because I think that's another good way to find out about funding, just seeing how other people frame their work from the perspective of a panel member, and seeing all the different things that come in under the different categories. It's
I guess I'll have that opportunity this year with OSCO.
Yeah,
but I haven't been called yet. I just know that I'm in the pool, so I'll report back.
Yeah. And for those who don't know, they bring that up every couple of years. Is that
Yeah.
So you can put your hand up to be an assessor for grants, which is a really important thing to get involved in. I guess I wanted to say also, as far as other practical opportunities, Australian Music Centre and APRA AMCOS have been putting out a lot of smaller grant opportunities for composing new work, and there's a lot of room there for all the areas we're talking about. But I think also another thing that I've learnt during this time is that part of the key element of developing work has been creating partnerships and creating relationships with not just musicians, but also organisations and venues and festivals and artistic directors, and starting to have conversations that aren't necessarily pitching or trying to sort of push a particular thing, but just sort of introducing yourself as an artist and being able to create a dialogue that, you know, goes beyond X amount of projects or whatever. Those sorts of things are the things that I think have sustained my work the most, well beyond a grant application that has been successful or unsuccessful.
Can we just backtrack a tiny bit? I think that's really interesting what you're talking about, but I just think on the grant application thing, because I know it is an area that a lot of people find really elusive, and it can be so frustrating after you've had like several knockbacks. But I actually have sat on quite a few panels for the Australia Council within music, but also for a cross-disciplinary international residency, and some various things for art orchestra, chambermaid. And I think it's just really important to remember when you're putting in applications that it's just an extraordinarily competitive process. Like every single one of those panels that I've sat on, you would have loved to fund like at least 100% more than you got to. You know, like if there's 5 opportunities, 10 were completely and absolutely valid and would have been amazing. So it's kind of like thinking about how you can make your application like one of those ones that just really rings true for the opportunity, and that just makes sense. Like I think when you're reading these applications as well, you're often having to read so many. So it needs to grab the reader. Like I know it can feel like you have to write in a very dry way, but somehow if you can try and write in a way that also allows the person who's reading it to really imagine what it is the project that you want to do, so that you're kind of like, oh, I want to see that, you know. Like I think in the recent, you know, commissions that we did, there were some projects where you just kind of went, oh, I can imagine that, and I want to be in the audience when that piece is being played. And I think really the other thing that's really important is just like making sure it's the right project for the right opportunity, not just taking, which is related to what Reuben was talking about, like not just approaching every single person with the same project, but kind of going, you know, here's this opportunity. You know, whenever someone say Arts House or I don't know, I can't think of another example right now, but they put something out to the world like, here's this opportunity. They also are an organisation who wants their values to be seen, represented in the art that they're presenting. So like they also need us, like they need the artists to make the work. So if you can think about like what you're actually giving them and how your work is a good fit for what they want to achieve, then I think your projects will, you know, get more support.
Yeah, it's really insightful, and I think you think of it like a job application. Really, you answer the criteria, but then you have to add something extra to get into the discussion point. And just finally, the obligatory COVID-19 impacts question. A lot of us felt through this time that this is going to change everything. And I'm wondering now, here in Victoria, it's kind of opening up and it gets a feeling like it might not close down again. Do you think that has been realised, or can you think of some impacts that you'd like to note, or effects that it had on your time in the Pathfinder program, or as an alumna of the Pathfinder program?
I think you get very good at being malleable. No matter how frustrating it is, I found for a little time in lockdown this year, it's funny, Reuben started 6 months on and then 6 months in lockdown, and then I was kind of the opposite, I think. And yeah, a lot of my job ended up being, marketing cancellations or helping to reschedule. And, when you have a really strong team, you get the things done. But I think, I learned a lot about, just kind of patience and, don't get me wrong, it was very frustrating for everyone, what we've just been through and continue to go through. But I think there were also a lot of other skills that I was able to take on during this past 6 months, like, really getting into more the marketing side of things and, adopting skills that I don't think I would have had the patience to do myself if I wasn't in this role, because, it's one thing doing social media for an organisation, but doing it for yourself, it feels like, a burden sometimes. So I think, I don't know, I think COVID for me personally has definitely honed in some different skills that I didn't have and may not have, focused on as much if there was everything else going as it should have. But
Yeah, it's funny. I feel like for me, ironically, I've made more work in the last 2 years than I have in my entire life. It's been absolutely at a blinding pace of creative, endeavour. But I think the reason why is that working in a space like this, both as an individual artist but also working as an organisation, you get really good at seeing your pile of things that you want to do and being a little more sort of, not brutal, not really pragmatic, but just sort of seeing what you have and what's available and just doing the shuffle and finding ways to kind of be nimble and be true to yourself. And, thankfully, I was in a position where I could make work at home and I could rethink and sort of design my practice in a way that didn't rely entirely on X, Y, and Z to happen. And I think working in that role allowed me to be thinking in those ways before everything landed. So by the time, we couldn't make any more work, I was busy sort of making records and making strong connections across the world and finding new opportunities to collaborate with really dear friends who I haven't been able to work with before for years, just because of there's a tyranny of distance. There's ways that we've learned how to work in this space that we would have never considered before. And I think, there's a flexibility that's been embedded in my personal practice through this time. Yeah.
And what about, your perspectives for the arts community more broadly? Do you think there's ongoing impacts? Will things be different, or do you think they'll go back to the way they were?
I hope they'll be different. I really do. I mean, there's been so many amazing conversations across individual artists, organisations, program directors, artistic directors who have all thought of ways to reconsider what was in some ways quite a ruthless way of making work and presenting work across the world. And I think that there's an amazing chance now to capture some of those new ways of thinking and developing things. And I just hope that we can embed some of those idealised structures into the future. I think time will tell a little bit.
What about you, Aviva? Do you have a perspective?
I don't know if I can guess if it will or not. I've been having a lot of conversations with other artists around, care and pace and, how we look after each other. I think a lot of people have realised that, what we were doing before was unsustainable in many ways. Our impact like on climate, the impact on our mental health and physical health, and the way that we were generally always exerting ourselves so much. And I think I have observed there's a bit of a resistance to going back to that. And I hope that sustains. So I got the opportunity to be part of a really beautiful artist lab actually last year, online group of people who met together intensively for 2 weeks, and that was actually an interesting program because it was organised by DAAD in Western Australia, so working with a lot of artists with disabilities and thinking about how the space of COVID had actually opened up a lot of benefits in terms of access for audiences and for artists, and sort of thinking about ways that we can sustain that. Like the opportunity to engage online, whether you're isolated due to kind of like physical limitations or family needs or regional artists and access, and trying to think about how we can keep that, even though we obviously all want to go back to the live experience. And I think that's really clear that online art doesn't replace what we do. But actually, I think we have so many more tools now for like understanding how to do that and how to include people and look after each other. I hope that that's going to be good. I mean, I think also like we had a little go of like universal basic income, so we all know that's pretty good now. So maybe we could give that a bit more of a go.
What about you, Helen? Do you have a perspective on future of art post-COVID?
I think that I really resonate with you were talking about like pace and I think back to my early 20s musician life, and I'm like, I don't know how I did that, like just 5 gigs a week, teaching, staying out late every night. I have no idea, like looking back at that pre-COVID times, how that was sustainable for me physically or creatively, especially with my instrument. I don't know how I kept my fingers. I did. They're still here. But I think COVID has taught me, I haven't exactly actually practiced heaps of bass at all during COVID. I've found it really hard. But I've composed a lot, and I've again had to be flexible with projects that have timelines, and to do remote recording, to skill up on those things, and to actually learn a lot from different processes of envisioning works, and then to refine a practice, to refine my practice further, because that pacing thing, you start to really know what your priorities are. And mentally it's hard to hold space for as many things as I used to do. I just don't have it in me. So I think that's been one plus side of it. I think that I've had space to sit back and just rethink what I want out of my artistic life, and to skill up on other ways of achieving parts of that don't involve just one way that I used to think was the only way. So
Great. Is there anything else any of you wanted to add about your Pathfinder experience before we open it up for questions? Sarah?
I feel like I didn't answer the first question that you asked. Or maybe we just didn't get around to me. There was something around
the community and network.
Yeah. I think that was huge for me. Particularly in terms of working with Daniel and David Wilfred. Like I really felt like I was stepping into this relationship that had been like growing already for 20 years. And then to be able to just like, because there was already so much trust that had been formed between musicians in Nooka and the Australian Art Orchestra, thanks to the work of so many musicians actually, like obviously initiated by Paul, but so many community musicians within the Nooka community, not just Daniel and David, and so many musicians within the art orchestra who have developed so much trust and like a kind of approach to playing music. And I felt that was probably one of the most amazing things I did in my year, was to get to go up there and just to, there's no way you could just rock up in Nooka usually as a musician and say, who wants to play some music, let's put on a concert. I mean, I guess you could, but I felt like it was amazing to be able to do that, and with Sunny as well, to be on that trip and to be there with Sunny's family and Peter's family, and yeah, it was really special. Yeah,
that's great.
I think on that point as well, one thing that has really changed my outlook has been my sense of time, as far as time investment and consideration has really lengthened through my time here. Like understanding that collaboration takes years and projects take multiple lifetimes, in terms of like the actual project to become its own thing, and to understand that you can be thinking with that sort of frame, as opposed to next thing, next grant, next gig, next year. There's a different way of understanding how these projects can evolve, or what your relationships are with people when you're working in a context like this, because you have to consider it from so many different angles. And a reflection on my side too is developing a project with spoken word artist Dhudhuroa and Taungurung during lockdown, and seeing what was a close personal friendship blossom into something which has at every stage grown into something that is something beyond a single album or a sort of creative process, and more of a the start of a long journey of understanding what it is to collaborate with someone, and having the opportunity to actually engage with an organisation, an ensemble in that dialogue is really important.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing your reflections of your time. I think we're so fortunate to be able to have you all here together and hear you play as well, which is what we're going to do next. But I wanted to open it out to questions first before we go to some more music. Does anybody have a question for anyone? Any of the Pathfinders? Yes.
I have a not very clear, maybe slightly personal question. How do you, I don't know if any of you can answer this, but how do you go about letting something grow, like something creative grow for yourself and giving it space? Whether it's like a project or an idea or a position, whether you have any reflections on that, and when you know that something feels ready, or whether when you need to push yourself and make something happen. Does that make any sense?
I'm definitely much better at doing it with other people. If I have one thing I noticed about COVID is I'm not very good at knowing when something has had enough space or when it's finished on my own. And there's something really great about I think just the working with other people, and just there's just a bit more limitation. Like, for example, when we made the Hand to Earth album earlier this year, we only had the 2 days that we had to make it, so like we just recorded what we could in those time, and everybody had how much energy they had or whatever other time commitments they had in that time. Then you work with what you made in that time, and then it sort of is what it can be. And I think also with a project like that, there is this feeling that there will be more, like there will be another album, hopefully. So maybe that's kind of nice as well, because you don't feel like this one has to be everything, which I struggle with on my own. Like, I don't know, I keep thinking I finished my solo album this year, and then I pull it apart and do it again.
I find with I've done a lot of mostly solo work in the past 2 years, and for me it's always just doing recordings and compiling like a portfolio of just sketches or ideas on a Google Drive or in a notebook. And I don't know, I also don't think I would ever finish those things unless I just booked a recording day. So I think for my like vegetable album, I just like booked a recording day in the Netherlands like 6 months from when I thought I felt ready. And that was actually torture, because I think I was ready when I booked it, but had to just keep playing the same music. I was like, oh God. So I think maybe that was an example of leaving too much time.
Mm.
But I think, there's something, that idea of holding space again is just, there's something valuable in, I think for me, just, compiling materials and reflecting on it when it feels right, like just going on a walk and listening to something you played the day before and making a note to yourself or on a Google Doc or in a notebook of just what resonates. And that's kind of how I go about things if I'm not collaborating with people who can help to propel that.
I think there's also something to be said about really advocating and booking in unproductive or non-outcome driven space for projects. I mean, the CMI is a beautiful example of this. I mean, like we're not pushing for a project here. We're not trying to come out of this with a solid outcome. And yet, what is learnt in this space is so powerful and so important for all of us in our own sort of way. And I think collaboration needs that as well. It needs a safe space that isn't driven by a deadline. That being said, the deadline is also important. But I think those two things need to happen in equal part, and they need to be given equal weight sometimes.
Yeah, I think that is one thing that the Pathfinders thing has taught me is like more patience. There's not always a rush to do everything like 6 months from now. It's like, no, if there's not a timeline, that's kind of a blessing sometimes too.